Okay, once again folks, we'll get ourselves underway in our History of Israel study. This is lesson number 8, and I'll have you take your Bibles once again and turn with me to Leviticus chapter 26. I'll take our sign down. Last time here in Leviticus 26, we went through the general gist of the 5 courses of punishment, and you got the general outline now of what each one of these courses of punishment contains. You understand how that each one amplifies and builds upon the succeeding one. And you also understand how that the 5th course of punishment is the last one mentioned here. There is no 6th course of punishment. There is no 7th, 8th, 9th, and whatever there. The 5th course of punishment is the last. And it's the most critical course of punishment to understand and appreciate. I spent the time mentioning that to you at the end of our study in our last session. And this session will focus right upon that 5th course of punishment, not only amplifying a little more upon the things that make it up, the captivity issue, desolation of the land, and so forth that we saw last time. But my main concern is that you appreciate the scope of this 5th course of punishment, and the reason why it's not so important is because once you get out of the historical books in our Old Testament, once you come to 2nd Chronicles, for example, and chapter 36, and the end of 2nd Kings there, what you find recorded there is the historical commencement of the 5th course of punishment. But that's almost like the end of the historical record God has in the dealings with His people Israel. That's not really accurate, of course. Ezra and Nehemiah and Esther are historical books, and what they're actually describing are a portion of God's history in dealing with Israel in one of the installments that makes up that 5th course of punishment. And the gospel accounts, of course, are historical dealings of God with His nation Israel, along with the opening chapters of the book of Acts especially. And what I want you to understand is that that's part of the 5th course of punishment. What I'm saying once again is from the end of 2nd Chronicles on, the things you're dealing with that 5th course of punishment. And from the time the Assyrian Babylonian captivity came upon the nation, from the time the 5th course of punishment commenced upon the nation, Israel's been under that 5th course of punishment. The installments that make it up haven't always been the same, but they've been under the 5th course of punishment. And you're under it in the gospel accounts there, and you're under it in the opening chapters of the book of Acts. And Israel will be under it and will be suffering the consequences of it in its final installment, in the day of the Lord, in the tribulation, the time of Jacob's trouble, in that portion of Israel's program that still remains to be carried out and will resume after this dispensation of Gentile grace in which we live is concluded by God. And when you realize that 5th course of punishment is the most important course to understand. It's the course that's still in effect. It's the course that hasn't been concluded yet. And with its conclusion, the kingdom of heaven is established. And the days of the Messiah take place within the 5th course of punishment. John the Baptist's ministry takes place within the 5th course of punishment. The 12 apostles are within the 5th course of punishment. And prophets like Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, Daniel, and through to Malachi there and everything, they're 5th course of punishment prophets. And you need to understand those things and have an appreciation for them. So that's what we're going to do in this hour. This hour is, we're not going to cover all that, I don't mean to imply that, but in this hour we're going to focus upon that 5th course and see more about it than any other one, and learn some things about it and see some things about it that got to be understood. Okay, let's get ourselves underway here once again. Leviticus chapter 26, and let's pick it up there with the 5th course description beginning in verse 27. And if you will not for all this hearken unto me, but walk contrary unto me. If you're not going to respond to the 4th course of punishment, but you're still going to walk contrary unto me. Verse 28, then I will walk contrary unto you also in fury. We commented upon that last time. Man, what a horrible sounding statement for God to be able to make, and especially to be on the receiving end of it. To have God walk contrary unto you in fury. But once again, that's what the law contracted for. Israel's leaders, when they signed that law contract, contracted for God to deal with on the basis of their performance, and to deal with them and give them what they merited. And good performance merited blessing. Bad performance merited cursing. And these are the courses of the curses, their negative performance merits. And if it comes down to the fourth course, they merit the beginning of the sieging of their cities and the reducing of their lands. And if they don't respond to that, they merit this fifth course, which begins with what's described there from verse 28 and down through where we stopped last time at about verse 32 there. If you walk contrary unto me, verse 28, then I will walk contrary unto you also in fury, and I, even I, will chastise you 7 times for your sins. And ye shall eat the flesh of your sons, and the flesh of your daughters shall ye eat. And we saw that the sieges of the cities and the siege of the city Jerusalem will continue on to the point of starvation and destruction of the people. And they'll consume themselves and eat their children and everything to survive. Horrible things, absolutely horrible things. But those will be taking place, and their conduct merits it. They're not getting God playing games with them here, or being sadistic or mean to them, or anything along those lines. They're getting what their conduct merits. And I will destroy your high places, and cut down your images, and cast your carcasses upon the carcasses of your idols, and my soul shall abhor you. And there's that horrible sounding expression once again, but that's what they'll merit. And I will make your cities waste, and bring your sanctuaries unto desolation. And I will not smell the savor of your sweet odors, and I'll bring the land into desolation. And your enemies which dwell therein shall be astonished at it. And I will scatter you among the heathen, and will draw out a sword after you, and your land shall be desolate, and and your cities waste. Man, what a horrible sounding situation once again for them. But that's exactly what this fifth course of punishment is going to involve. And notice once again the issue in verse 32: your enemies which dwell therein. Once again, far advanced upon the border raids of the first course of punishment, and even advanced upon the invasion of the land and the occupying the open spaces in the fourth course of punishment. Now the enemies are residing right in the land, and they'll take the people of Israel captive, and the people of Israel will be taken captive out of their land, and the enemies will dwell in the land. They'll possess it. They'll own it. They'll claim it for themselves. Verse 33, I'll scatter you among the heathen, and will draw out a sword after you, and your land shall be desolate, and your cities waste. Desolation of the land, cities waste. Now we saw all that last time. I just reminded you of some of the highlights, so to speak, in connection with it. But now I want you to go on with me here at verse 34. And I want you to see some things that are said now about the goal of the fifth course of punishment. And some things that are said regarding the fact that it's an extensive course of punishment. Verse 34, then shall the land enjoy her Sabbaths, as long as it lieth desolate, and ye be in your enemy's land. Even then shall the land rest and enjoy her Sabbaths. As long as it lieth desolate it shall rest, because it did not rest in your Sabbaths when ye dwelt upon it. And upon them that are left alive of you I will send a faintness into their hearts, in the lands of their enemies, and the sound of a shaken leaf shall chase them. And they shall flee as fleeing from a sword, and they shall fall when none pursueth. And they shall fall upon one upon another, as it were before a sword when none pursueth. Ye shall have no power to stand before your enemies. And ye shall perish among the heathen, and the land of your enemies shall eat you up. And they that are left of you shall pine away in their iniquity in their enemies' lands. And also in the iniquities of their fathers shall they pine away with them. Even that's not all. But we need to see these things now and get an appreciation for these things right here as we begin to focus upon this fifth course of punishment and begin to grasp the extent of it, the scope of it, and some of the issues involved in it beyond just the sacking of the land and the captivity and the scattering of the people among the Gentile lands. Notice once again there in verse 34. Oh, before we look at that, come on down and look with me at verse 36 and down to verse 39 where we just read. I want you to get an appreciation for the fact that, that this fifth course of punishment is going to be a lengthy thing. The other courses of punishment are lengthy also, and you'll be able to eventually, as we start going through the history and everything, something like this, for example. If we let this, here's once again for a point of reference, Mount Sinai, where the law contract was entered into. Here's let that squiggle represent the Jordan River. They crossed over the Jordan River, and therefore, in here, for example, you're dealing with the things going on in the book of Joshua. And as we'll see, the first course of punishment is going to get itself underway in the land, among the people, in the generation that arises following Joshua. As we'll see, actually the book of Judges will start out in its first 2 chapters describing the arrival of the meriting and the arrival of the first course of punishment. And what I'm saying to you in connection with that is that you'll be able to mark that down and say, there it is, and you'll be able to give a reference. You'll have the book of Judges there, and you'll give a reference, and you'll have a chapter and a verse, you'll write that in, and that's where the first course of punishment gets itself underway. And then you go on and everything, and you'll come along and you'll recognize the beginning of the second course of punishment, and you'll be able to put down a book, a chapter, and a verse, and say, there it is. There's when the second course of punishment historically getting itself underway. That's what it's testifying to. The second course is starting now, and so forth. And what I'm saying in connection with span of time and so forth is that you're going to be able to, in connection with that, come along and get a good idea of how long that Israel was under that first course of punishment before they merited the second course. And the same to the second course before they merit the third, and so forth there. Well, here when you don't have time factors given to you as the courses are presented here. As you go through the history, you'll be able to figure those things out and get a good grasp upon them. But you do have something in connection with the description of the fifth course here that lets you realize that there's a length of time factor to it, and that itself is a mark or an issue in that fifth course of punishment. Is the duration of time. It's a long one. It's going to have some length to it. And the other ones are long too, there's some length to them and everything. But this is going to be a feature of the fifth course of punishment. And I want you to at least note that, get the gist of it here. Leviticus 26 once again, and look with me if you would at verse 36 and down through verse 39. We just read those verses. He says, and upon them that are left alive of you I will send a faintness into their hearts in the lands of their enemies. And there's going to be a faintness of heart, a great depression and so forth, and a feeling of everything being lost, and great dejection and so forth coming upon the people as they're out there in their enemies' lands, and a misery associated with that, and there's a despondency and so forth associated with that is going to be part of this fifth course of punishment. And one of the factors that's going to make that thing a reality to them is the fact that a great deal of time is going to be involved in this. What they're going to be suffering in the fifth course of punishment is going to have a burden of time associated with it. Verse 37, they shall fall one upon another as it were before a sword, when none pursueth. And you shall have no power to stand before your enemies. And you shall perish among the heathen in the land of your enemies, and the land of your enemies shall eat you up. And they that are left of you shall pine away in their iniquity in your enemies' lands. And also the iniquities of their fathers shall they pine away with them. The pining away concept there. Man, you got the idea of languishing there and drawn out sorrow and woe is me and grief and everything, and just pining away and almost diminishing and diminishing and diminishing, and you got a burden of time factor there. It's there in what's being said, and you get the understanding from what's being spoken about here, that this fifth course of punishment has got length to it, and has got a feature aspect to it of length and time to it that's outstanding to it with respect to the other courses. And maybe right now your appreciation for that isn't there, but I'd like you to acknowledge the sense of it and the reality of it. And you'll see the importance of seeing that when it comes to dealing with the prophets whom God raised up when the fifth course was ready and was coming upon the nation. This basic issue here concerning length and duration and long time concept and everything, and that this was going to be a burdensome course of punishment in view of length of time and everything, that issue is picked up by those fifth course of punishment prophets, and they come along and they talk about the fifth course of punishment for the installments, plural, that it has before it's fulfilled. Now, we've kind of seen already in connection with the earlier courses of punishment, number 1, number 2, 3, and 4, that there's more than one issue to them. Like course 1 starts off with the physical afflictions and infirmities and illnesses and so forth, and then it goes on to the issue of border raids and trouble with their enemies, and I talked about kind of like 2 installments or 2 aspects to it. In a sense, the word installment really wasn't a good word to use in connection with the previous courses, because it's not so much that they get the physical afflictions and that's all they get for a while, and then they get the enemies dealing with them. Aspects is a better word, or something similar to that is a better concept to be utilizing there. I use the word installment because I think of that word so much in connection with the fifth course of punishment. Installments is really a good concept with the fifth course of punishment. And what you're going to see is that this duration of time issue, in which the pining away takes place, and that ongoing concept of this, there's going to be a number of installments to this fifth course of punishment that are going to be filling up that time, that length, that duration and everything. And right now all I want you to do is to gain a sense for that. And you can see it just by the terminology that's used here, that time's going to be a burdensome thing in connection with this fifth course of punishment. Acknowledge that, therefore, and now come back, if you would, to verse 34 and verse 35. And I want you to notice an identifying feature here, goal, in connection with this fifth course of punishment. And one of the reasons why I want you to note this, I'm going to point it out to you, is because I want to give you a demonstration of how it is that you see in the historical account the arrival of a course of punishment. I'm going to use the fifth course here and its beginning as an example for this, as a demonstration of this. Now, I've kind of done that already for you. I've talked about the fact that the captivity here is easily identifiable. The Assyrian Babylonian captivity is the captivity being spoken about here. But there's something else here that has a marker to it, that has a complement later on. It's kind of like a cross-reference almost. Here it's marked for you, and you as you're reading along in Israel's history, you got this marker in the back of your mind. You know this thing is an identifying feature of the fifth course of punishment. You know it's a goal of the fifth course. And when you see it described for you, you know the fifth course has started. And I just want to give you a demonstration of how this works. So that when we start going through the history, we'll be taking those identifying features of all the courses, beginning with course 1 and then 2 and following, and we'll be looking for those things in historical account. When we see them come to pass, we'll say, there it is. That's how you're able to put down the book, the chapter, and the verse, and say, there it is. So look at it here. Look at it here in the fifth course. Excuse me. Leviticus 26, verse 34. When they're taken out of the land, and they're taken captive into their enemies' lands, and their land is lying desolate and the cities are lying waste, then, God says in verse 34, at that time, when that takes place, a goal is being accomplished. Something is being accomplished that needs to get done. Then shall the land enjoy her Sabbath, verse 34, as long as it lieth desolate, and ye be in your enemy's land. Even then shall the land rest and enjoy her Sabbaths. As long as it lieth desolate, it shall rest, because it did not rest in your Sabbaths when ye dwelt upon it. That last part of verse 35 is part of what I was talking to you about very briefly in the last lesson, when I said to you that there's also similar passages to Leviticus 26 in the law contract, in which God describes what Israel is going to do in their failure to comply with the law contract. This is what they get because of their failure. This is what they contract for God to do to them because of their failure. But there's also a passage in which God describes their failure and how it's going to be an increasing, intensifying, worsening type thing. One of those major passages is the Song of Moses, Deuteronomy 32. And if we have opportunity in this hour, we'll take a look at something there. But in that song is a testimony, as a witness against Israel in the day they do those horrifying things and provoke God to jealousy, in which the whole thing's mapped out for them, saying that you were going to do this. Before they ever entered the land, God told them what they were going to do. He said, I know your stiff-neckedness and the hardness of your heart, and I know the iniquities that you will fulfill. And he maps them out and said, you'll do this, you'll do that, you'll do this, you'll do that. One of the things that he said they'd do, they'd come to the point where they'd have abominable idols, even more abominable than was in the land in the first place when they entered into it. And they'll have sanctuaries with horrific things going on in them. That's what was referred to back there in verse 31, where he said he'd make the cities waste and bring your sanctuaries unto desolation. Well, one of the other things is also verse 35. They wouldn't let the land rest in its Sabbaths. That's one of the commands, the statute sitting in the law contract. It was for the land to enjoy Sabbaths too, but they wouldn't do that. They'd do some other things with the land. They'd actually end up carving into the land abominations. And instead of having the land rest, they'd make the land sick of them. There's a concept the Lord uses in connection with the Canaanite nations that were in the land. He talked about the land vomiting them out, spewing them out, because of all the abominations the Lord hates being done by them in the land. But what most people fail to realize is that the Lord comes along and talks about the land also vomiting Israel out. Talks about Israel not participating in those things, lest the land spew them out. And what happens is they get into position under the policy of evil in which they do worse than the ones Satan had in his natural control. And Satan just rejoices in that. And he had his heyday with them. Well, they put themselves in a position where the land spews them out, and it needs to rest. And that's what's being spoken about here. Israel should have let it rest on a particular calendar basis that was given to them. But the Lord knew they wouldn't be doing that. And so when he casts them out of the land, sends them into captivity, one of the goals of that is the issue here of letting the land enjoy her Sabbaths. Now that's a marker also, folks. That statement comes along and tells you that when you see God saying that's taking place, you know the fifth course has begun, and you also know that its first installment is underway. Now I want to show you that. Hold your place in Leviticus 26. Come over with me, if you would, to 2 Chronicles, chapter 36. Last chapter in 2 Chronicles. 2 Chronicles, chapter 36. Let me, while you're turning there, let me use my marvelous pink eraser here and erase this and kind of try and put this on in a little better manner. My timeline here is kind of cramped, but I think we can still do this adequately enough. Let me put the squiggle line back in there representing the Jordan River. And I'm gonna put for you here, let this line right here represent where we are in 2 Chronicles. All right, we'll just put that up there. 2 Chronicles 36. All right, that's what, on our timeline, that's the point of time where 2 Chronicles 36 is being fulfilled right there. All right, let this line right here represent Judges 1 and 2. Now I just mentioned to you, we haven't looked at that yet to verify and substantiate it, but I just mentioned to you that what you're going to find when you get to Judges 1 and 2 is that the first course of punishment is getting itself underway. Now, the books that you got, God's put His Word together, not in a haphazard, jumbled up manner or anything like that. He's put His Word together in the order in which He wants you to be reading it and studying it and getting the biblical theology, the doctrinal comprehension He wants you to have. And that doesn't only apply to His completed Word of God that you possess today. That applied to the portion of God's Word that Israel had in their history as things went on. And the book from Judges to 2 Chronicles is a doctrinal progression and historical progression of God's program with Israel. And even though the Chronicle books repeat a lot that's in the 1st and 2nd book of Kings that precede them, it isn't simply a repetition of the account. It does repeat the historical events again, but it supplies information for you with some behind-the-scene things regarding God's dealings that aren't there on the surface in 1st and 2nd Kings. And therefore, even though 1st Chronicles sends you back again to the beginning of the historical nature, beginning of the historical outworking of God's plan and purpose with Israel, it's not just a repeat. You go through that history again, and you see some things that were going on that weren't evident and that you couldn't handle yet in 1st and 2nd Kings. God knows what He's doing putting His Word together like that. And you need an appreciation for that. I just say that to you right now so you understand the reality and the validity of what I'm saying by going from Judges to the end of 2nd Chronicles there as one progressive historical account. Now, what I want you to understand, what I want you to be able to see and appreciate by looking at what we're going to look at right now here in 2nd Chronicles and in view of what is said back there in Leviticus 26, is that you're going to understand by what we're going to look at that in 2nd Chronicles 36, you know by what it says there that that 5th course of punishment is now underway. And that therefore between Judges 1 and 2nd Chronicles 36, you've got the account of the 1st, 2nd, 3rd, 4th, and 5th course of punishments coming upon the nation Israel. Look at it with me. 2nd Chronicles chapter 36. Let's pick it up here in verse 14. Now you got the issue of Nebuchadnezzar, king of Babylon here, and his exploits and everything, and his sieges laid against the city of Jerusalem and everything, and Judea being spoken about in the preceding verses, and the kings of Israel's response to all that. Verse 14 says, "Moreover, all the chief of the priests and the people transgressed very much after all the abominations of the heathen, and polluted the house of the Lord, which He had hallowed in Jerusalem." That verse is talking about the actions of the nation Israel. It's referring to the very thing I mentioned a few moments ago when I referred to those passages sitting in the law in which God described what Israel themselves would do and how they in themselves would be on a progressive course in which they would worsen in their conduct and behavior towards God and towards that law contract. The truth of the matter is what they would do is they would follow a course Satan had charted for them in his policy of evil against them. It would be a policy, it would be a course from that policy that would be much like the course for this world that he had all his nations walking in accordance with, but he had some special features to it that he would bring upon the nation Israel themselves because of his great desire to corrupt God's capacity to utilize Israel. And he had a zeal behind polluting and corrupting Israel and making them unusable, unfit to be utilized by God. And what's being referred to there in verse 14 is that all the chief of the priests and all the people transgressed very much after all the abominations of the heathen. They got themselves involved in that course for this world that Satan had charted, and they got themselves involved in those abominations, all those things God hates, and they also did it very much. Man, it's almost as if they took everything that was out there and scooped it all up and brought it into themselves. And in essence, folks, that really is what took place. But it's that's merited not only the curses of the law contract, but in the progressive nature in which they committed those abominations and stuck with those abominations. They went through and merited the courses of punishment and chastisement of Leviticus 26. And what you're being told here right now in 2 Chronicles 36 is that they've done it to such a degree now that they're meriting the 5th course of punishment. And that's what's coming upon them with Nebuchadnezzar. He's that king of the enemy that's coming in and is going to make waste their cities and leave their land a desolation and throw down their sanctuaries and take them into captivity. Verse 15. And the Lord God of their fathers, by his messengers rising up betimes and sending, because he had compassion on his people and on his dwelling place. Man, the provisions were there for hearken, 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 listen. But they mocked the messengers of God and despised his words and misused his prophets until the wrath of the Lord rose against his people till there was no remedy. There was nothing else to do but to bring that final course of punishment in which he said, I'll walk contrary to you in fury. The wrath of God arose against his people till there was no remedy but for his fury to be poured out upon them, or to begin to be poured out. That's an important way to express that, as you'll see. Therefore, since that was the situation, he, God, verse 17, brought upon them the king of the Chaldees, who slew their young men with the sword in the house of their sanctuary, and had no compassion upon young man or maiden, old man or him that stooped for age. He gave them all into his hand. And all the vessels of the house of God, great and small, and the treasures of the house of the Lord, and the treasures of the king and of his princes, all these he brought to Babylon. And they burnt the house of God, and brake down the wall of Jerusalem, and burnt all the palaces thereof with fire, and destroyed all the goodly vessels thereof. There's the destruction of the city and everything spoken about back there in Leviticus 26, 27 and following. And them that had escaped from the sword carried away to Babylon. There's the ones that remain and get carried away concept there, where they were servants to him and his sons until the reign of the kingdom of Persia. Now get this, verse 21. To fulfill the word of the Lord by the mouth of Jeremiah, until the land had enjoyed her Sabbaths. For as long as she lay desolate, she kept Sabbath to fill 70 years. Now, where'd you hear about that? Where have you heard about the issue of the land enjoying her Sabbaths? Well, right where your finger still is, in Leviticus 26. Sitting there is the issue of the fact that the first primary goal of this 5th course of punishment is to let the land enjoy her Sabbaths. Under the abominations of Israel, the land hasn't done that. And the land's in a position where it wants to spew out its inhabitants and cease the abominations. It can't take it anymore. And it does so. They vomit it out of the land. And the land's now going to enjoy her Sabbaths. Now it says there in verse 21, this is done to fulfill the word of the Lord spoken by the mouth of Jeremiah. Jeremiah was a prophet once again who was raised up when that 5th course began. And he spoke about, we're going to look at some passages in his prophecy just a moment here, in which he made reflection back as to what was going on, being what was said back there in the contract that was made with Israel through Moses. What Jeremiah was given was how long that first installment in this 5th course of punishment was going to be. How long it was going to take that the land had to lay desolate. It was going to be for 70 years, 70 years. That's not all to the 5th course. I just told you, just saw back there in Leviticus 26, how that there's a length and a duration to this 5th course of punishment that has time as a burden. And even though 70 years of time is a great length of time, it's not a burden to the point of pining away and perishing and having such despondency come upon you because you think all is lost and there isn't anything for Israel anymore. The truth of the matter is that's only the first installment. That's evident, and there'll be some things to see in that later on in Leviticus 26. But the thing I'm after right now is the ability for you to see how you use Leviticus 26, how you use the information that's sitting there, and how that in truth God did in Leviticus 26 map out Israel's history in advance. And there's a host more of things we could have looked at if our entire series on this was just talking about the five courses of punishment. If we took all the 16, 18, or 20 lessons we're going to have on this and weren't making it a history of Israel, but just an appreciation for the five courses of punishment, yeah, there's a host of things we could be looking at there and everything. But all I'm after is that you get the basic gist of things, and you see that there's something there about that fifth course of punishment in which you got an identifier, a marker that comes along and says, when you see this again, it ought to click in your mind. A bell ought to go off and say, hey, that's the fifth course of punishment, spoken about in Leviticus 26, and here it is right here. There's the issue with the land enjoying her Sabbath. The reason for that is because that fifth course of punishment demands it. So now you know that when you're reading what's described there in 2 Chronicles chapter 36, you're able to come along, and if you have a chart like this, for example, you're able to come along and you're able to put a number 5 there, and you're able to come along and say the fifth course of punishment is getting itself underway in what's historically described in 2 Chronicles 36. And you're also able to understand that the first installment of that fifth course of punishment is going to last 70 years. Now, you don't know how many other installments there are going to be because this passage isn't designed to teach you that. You could go over to Jeremiah, though, for example, and you'll find out he not only described the length of time of the first installment, but he also described the succeeding installments. Though he didn't give a time factor to them, that was reserved for Daniel, he still described that there was more installments to come, and you got the basic gist of how many there'd be. But just by the information here, just by Leviticus 26 and 2 Chronicles 36, you're able to come along, you're able to say, 2 Chronicles 36 with the Assyrian-Babylonian captivity. The Assyrian captivity, once again, took place earlier on the northern kingdom. The Babylonian captivity through Nebuchadnezzar is now taking place in the southern kingdom. Through the two of them together, the land, therefore, in the northern kingdom, the southern kingdom, lies desolate and begins to enjoy her Sabbaths. And based upon Leviticus 26, you're able to come along and say, with that event, and with the statement of 2 Chronicles 36, I know that when that captivity took place and Nebuchadnezzar sacked the city in finality and took them captive into Babylon there, that the fifth course of punishment got itself underway. But now, with that, you know a lot more right now. Since that's the case, and you know how those courses of punishment operate, you know how number one then builds, number one goes, then number 2 builds upon it, and then number 3 comes, it builds upon the previous 2, then number 4 comes, it builds upon those 3, and then number 5 comes, it builds upon the other 4. You know, therefore, and that since they come in courses like that, you know that someplace earlier on in the account, keep on backing up from chapter 36 on earlier in the historical, you know someplace back there, you're going to come along and find the place where the fourth course is going to start. And you keep on backing up, and you know you're going to come along and find the place where that third course starts. And you're going to keep on backing up, and you're going to come along and find a place where that second course starts. And you're going to keep on backing up, and you're going to find a place where that first course starts. The same ease with which you're able to find the identifier for the fifth course and its beginning applies to the other ones. There'll be things in the historical account that you'll be able to find, that you'll be able to see matching right up with the previous courses described in Leviticus 26, and you'll be able to say, there's number 4 starting, there's number 3. I'm going backwards here because that's just the way things are working. But you're going to be reading this way, of course, from Judges on, and you're going to see there's the beginning of the first course, and you're going to go on everything. You're going to see the things in that first course transpiring. You're going to get a sense of the duration in which God allows that first course to go. You're going to have a marvelous appreciation for the issue of God's mercy and compassion. Do you notice that expression there once again in verse 15? They brought all the abominations. Verse 14 says, put themselves in a worthy position for receiving that fifth course of punishment. And verse 16 says, and the Lord God of their fathers sent to them, past tense once again, he had sent to them by his messengers, rising up betimes and sending, because he had compassion on his people and on his dwelling place. God did that in every one of the courses. In every one of the courses, God compassionately dealt with his people and endeavored to not have to bring the next course upon them. That's going to be an important thing when we start going through the history for you to acknowledge and appreciate. And what I'm saying in that is, you'll see those things. You'll see the first course starting. You'll go through the book of Judges there and everything, and you'll see the reality of those issues in the first course coming upon the nation. And at the exact same time, you'll see that kind of issue there. God having compassion on his people, and him doing things that the law contract didn't even call for him to do, trying to get his people reformed and to hearken unto him, so they don't have to have that second course come. And you'll see them refuse it. You'll see them mock the messengers, despise the words, misuse the prophets, so that the second course had to come. And you'll see that same issue repeated again under the second course, so the third course has to come. And you'll see that same issue repeated in the third course, so the fourth has to come. And the same under the fourth, so the fifth has to come, like right here. But you'll see all that because you know Leviticus 26. You see how important that passage is? You see how critical it is? It is the passage to understand and appreciate, so you can understand and appreciate God's program with Israel and the outworking of that program. I was just going to do something there, and I think I'll hold off for that for now. And if time permits, I'll do what I was just going to do. But right now, I want you to look at some other passages with me. We had Jeremiah sit before us here. Reference is made to him in verse 21. To fulfill the word of the Lord by the mouth of Jeremiah, until the land enjoyed her Sabbath, excuse me, etc. there. I've made mention to you already, in connection with talking about how critical this Leviticus 26 is, that those prophets God raised up, especially when the prophets came at the time the fifth course was being threatened to them or was beginning with them. I mentioned to you how those prophets make reference back to Leviticus 26 and talk about the fact that what's happening in the nation is happening because of what's sitting back there. Well, I want you to look at some passages like that and I want you to understand how important the prophets saw that passage, because you need to at least have a measure of understanding and have a measure of importance resident within your heart for that passage like they had for it. And I want to do some things to get that down. So come with me if you would. You can still keep a finger stuck there in Leviticus 26 if you'd like. You may find it profitable to flip back and see the issues. But come with me if you would, first of all, to Isaiah 65. Isaiah chapter 65. Now, Isaiah is a prophet who was raised up before the fifth course of punishment came. He was raised up under the fourth course of punishment. He's raised up, therefore, during this time right in here, between the fourth and the beginning of the fifth course of punishment there. Isaiah the prophet is raised up during that time. And he's raised up, though, at the point at which a negative response is an obvious thing to the chastisement of the fourth course. In other words, it's an obvious thing that they were not hearkening, and they were continuing to walk contrary to God, and they were getting to the point where the wrath of God was arising to the point where there would be no remedy. It was going to burst forth with the fury the fifth course calls for. Isaiah is a prophet that God raised up at that time, and he sets those issues forth. And throughout his prophecy, repeatedly throughout his prophecy, is indictments against the nation Israel for the worthiness of the fifth course coming. The final indictment is sitting here in Isaiah 65. And I want you to see something. This passage of Isaiah is an extremely important one. And I won't take the time to talk about the issues regarding it that pertain to the time out here when the Messiah was here and everything. Although I say that to you right now because I mentioned to you how the fifth course of punishment has more than one installment to it. And you need to appreciate that concept when you come to the prophets of the fifth course, like Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel, Daniel, Hosea, and on to Malachi there. All those prophets are prophets of the fifth course. And you need to understand that the things they set forth in their prophecies, the things they set forth information that pertains to the whole scope of the fifth course of punishment. Now, I put my hand across the dispensation of grace. You understand and appreciate that that parenthesis, once again, is the dispensation of Gentile grace in which we live today. And God's program with Israel is not in effect, and is not progressing on, and is not being worked out in this dispensation of Gentile grace. This dispensation of Gentile grace, once again, it has to do with the revelation of the mystery of Christ. It has to do with a revelation that was not made known in ages and generations past. The prophets back here knew nothing about the dispensation of Gentile grace, and there's nothing back in the prophets pertaining to this dispensation of Gentile grace. And I just underscore that to you one more time and everything, because you're going to see my hand sweep across every once in a while, and I don't want you to get the wrong impression of thinking I'm contradicting myself on what I've said in previous lessons and so forth. But I do want you to understand now something about that fifth course again. The fifth course of punishment, once again, once it begins, the things in Leviticus 26 and verses 27 and following describe the fifth course of punishment throughout its duration up until the dispensation of grace came in, and the part that will resume and be fulfilled when the dispensation of grace is over with. Maybe I can kind of illustrate it like this. Maybe I can kind of just put some ongoing right-hand sides of the circle there to indicate that you're still in that fifth course of punishment for as long as those lines exist, until the Lord returns at the end of the tribulation period there, which is the last installment in that fifth course of punishment, till the Lord returns and gives the kingdom by his Jehovah's grace to Israel. That fifth course, from the time the Babylonian captivity took the nation captive until the kingdom is established, Israel's under that fifth course of punishment. Now, I'm making an issue out of that more than I planned to a few moments ago when I said I'd make a comment or two about it. But I think it's an important thing to have you have some appreciation for, and to dock it in the back of your mind, so to speak, or make a note in your notes and realize we're going to deal with it when we get to the fifth course. But I say that to you right now because when you're in the fifth course of punishment prophets, like where we are here right now in Isaiah 65, you need to realize that what's said here not only has an application and a bearing upon the fifth course when it was beginning, but it has a bearing upon things as the fifth course goes on. Folks, that's why there are passages in the prophets that when you read them in the prophets appear, and rightfully so, to have a present time application right when the prophet was talking about them. And yet you'll find those passages quoted, for example, by the Lord himself when he's here and talking about them being fulfilled at this time. And you'll even find passages like that quoted by circumcision apostles like Peter, James, and John in their epistles of Hebrews to Revelation out here. And you'll find passages quoted as having fulfillment out there, though the prophet who said them might have been Isaiah back here, and when you read in this context back here, it looks like it fits right at that time. The only way that can be true, folks, as it is because of the more than one installment concept in the fifth course of punishment. Now, once again, we're going to talk about that when we get to the fifth course and deal with it. But I say it to you right now because when you read Isaiah 65 here, you're reading about something that is quoted later on as having to do with Israel in the days of the Messiah, and even having a bearing out there. Yet at the exact same time, it's addressed to Israel there. The reason is because it all pertains to the fifth course of punishment. If there was a sixth course and a seventh course, those things couldn't exist like that. but they all pertain to the fifth course. Well, enough said on that, otherwise we won't get accomplished what we need to get accomplished here. Isaiah 65, verses 1 and down through verse 5. Like I said, it's a final indictment that God levels against the nation for their worthiness for the fifth course to come upon them. Look at verse 3, for example, or verse 2. I have spread out my hands all the day unto a rebellious people, which walketh in a way that was not good, after their own thoughts. They're not walking in the law contract once again after God's ways and doing God's paths. They're walking in a way that's not good of their own thoughts. A people that provoketh me to anger continually to my face, that sacrifices in gardens and burnt incense upon altars of brick, both violations of the law contract, which remain among the graves, another violation of the law contract, and lodge in the monuments, another violation, which eat swine's flesh, another violation, and broth of abominable things in their vessels, which say, stand by thyself, come not near to me, for I am holier than thou. Total disregard for God's Jehovahness and the pride issue once again. These, he says, are a smoke in my nose, a fire that burneth all the day. Total irritation to him. Total irritation. Behold, verse 6, consequence. It is written before me, I will not keep silence, but will recompense, even recompense into their bosom your iniquities and the iniquities of your fathers together, saith the Lord, which have burned incense upon the mountains and blasphemed me upon the hills. Therefore will I measure their former work into their bosom. What I want you to notice here, in verse 6, a judgment's coming, he says. And your iniquities, the iniquities of your father, are going to be recompensed. And we're going to measure their former work into their bosom. But notice the reason why he's going to do it. Because I just think it's a great idea to do it now. This just dawned on me that I think I'm going to do this. No, there's a contract written that calls for it. Verse 6. Behold, it is written before me, I will not keep silence, but will recompense, even recompense into their bosom your iniquities, etc., etc. There's something written down that says, when Israel does this, I got to do this, because the contract says it's got to be done. But where's that? Law contract. But where specifically? Leviticus 26. Recompensing into their bosom the iniquities of their fathers, their iniquities and iniquities of their fathers and everything, is the issue of taking Leviticus 26 there and seeing all the abominations that are built up from the days of their fathers, and his soul abhors them. And he can't take the irritation anymore. And he walks contrary to them in fury. And he destroys all that has historically built us up in them from the days of their fathers. Isaiah here is making reference to the contracted course of punishment number 5 in Leviticus 26. He says, written before me, it's going to be done. Coming very quickly here, Jeremiah chapter 11. Now we're whittling down on time here pretty rapidly, folks, and I did it one more time here. I failed to look at my clock appropriately when we started this tape. And I didn't look at it until I thought we were about 3 or 4 minutes into it, and I may be wrong on that. So I might have to cut this tape short so we don't lose anything on it. But no more on that. Jeremiah chapter 11. Beginning here in chapter 11, you get the threat of the fifth course coming. Verse 1, the word that came to Jeremiah from the Lord. Jeremiah is a prophet once again, raised up after Isaiah there. He's raised up with the fifth course coming upon the nation. I'll just stick that J-E-R there for Jeremiah. You already saw in 2 Chronicles 36 that God gave him a time schedule for that first installment of the 70 years to the land to lay Sabbath. And that's sitting here in the passage, not in chapter 11, but in the book of Jeremiah. And you can look at that in chapter 25 and chapter 29. But before you get to the time schedule of the first installment, you got information regarding an indictment for the worthiness of the nation to receive that fifth course of punishment. Hear the words of this covenant, and speak unto the men of Judah and to the inhabitants of Jerusalem, and say unto them, Thus saith the Lord God of Israel, Cursed be the man that obeyeth not the words of this covenant, which I commanded your fathers in the day that I brought them forth out of the land of Egypt from the iron furnace, saying, obey my voice and do them according to all which I command you, so shall you be my people, and I'll be your God, that I may perform the oath which I have sworn unto your fathers, to give them a land flowing with milk and honey, as it is this day. Then answered I and said, so be it, O Lord. Jeremiah is told to go out and tell the people that you're cursed if you're not obeying the words of this covenant. And they're made to realize that the situation they've got themselves into is a situation coming under the curse of God. And Jeremiah comes along and he says, man, that's the way it is. So be it, Lord. Man, you're not doing anything unrighteous at all. You're not doing anything that isn't in line with what we asked for. Verse 6, then the Lord said unto me, proclaim all these words in the cities of Judah and the streets of Jerusalem, saying, hear ye the words of this covenant, and do them. For I earnestly protested unto your fathers in the day that I brought them out of the land of Egypt, even unto this day, rising early and protesting, saying, obey my voice. Yet they obeyed not, nor inclined their ear, but walked every one in the imagination of the evil heart. Therefore, since that's what they did and failed to respond, therefore, that goes right back to when he brought them out of Egypt once again, he says, therefore, I will bring upon them all the words of this covenant, which I commanded them to do, but they did them not. I'm going to bring upon them all the words, the law of this covenant. Well, what words? He's talking about cursing words here. He's talking about the issue of the curse that they're going to get if they don't respond. They haven't responded, haven't heard, I'm going to bring all the words, all the curses upon you. Well, where are they then? All the curses are sitting there in Leviticus 26 in courses. So if you're going to get all of them, you're in that final course, aren't you? Yeah, you are. Jeremiah is there, and here's the issue of the fifth course of punishment. But it's explained to Israel through Jeremiah that what you're getting is the curses in that contract. And you're getting all of them. You're getting the total of them. You're getting that fifth course, therefore. Very quickly, Lamentations, chapter 2. And we'll have to stop with this. We'll pick it up next time with a few remaining comments regarding the scope of the fifth course of punishment, and then we'll start going through the history. Lamentations chapter 2, these are the lamentations of Jeremiah. The city's been sacked, the fifth course has begun, and Jeremiah sits there and bemoans and laments over the city, over what she's to be in God's plan and purpose, and what her performance has merited God to do to her in that law contract. Chapter 2, verse 17, quickly just notice this. The Lord hath done that which he had devised. He hath fulfilled his word that he had commanded in the days of old. He hath thrown down and hath not pitied, and he hath caused thine enemy to rejoice over thee. He hath set up the horn of thine adversaries. Jeremiah just described that issue of the adversary's total victory. But he says the Lord's done that which he had devised, had devised. There's a past tense issue here. Jeremiah is looking back and he's saying, I see what's going on here. What had been devised is now being fulfilled. Sitting in the contract is the device, the devising of God, that they signed their name on the dotted line and said, that's what we want if we don't perform. And he's fulfilled his word that he had commanded in the days of old. He's thrown down. He has not pitied. Where do you find that? Fifth course of punishment, to throw it down. My soul will abhor you. I'm not going to pity you. And I'll set up the horn of your adversaries. Your enemies will rule over you. Okay. Now, we might be cutting this off a couple minutes early. I really don't know, because like I said, I lost track of time here. But we need to, it's an appropriate place for us to stop once again. And next time, like I said, we'll look at a few more passages in which the scope of the fifth course is to be appreciated and the references back to it so you have the appreciation the prophets had for it. And then we'll begin to utilize it as God intends it to be utilized as the guideposts throughout Israel's history so you know what's going on and so you can understand and appreciate that history. And so that Old Testament aspect of God's book makes the sense to you it ought to make. And you see the progression of Israel's program and the outworking of it. And you see them learning the lesson the hard way, that God's Jehovah's and grace is their only hope.